Greetings and welcome, and thank you once again for joining us for yet another edition of our Sunday Spooky Storytime. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you've watched a ton of our videos or whether this is one of your first times ever tuning in for us. Thank you and welcome. Now, in the past, when I've done these videos, I've covered a pretty wide range of things. I've talked about ghosts of humans. I've talked about spirits of great vengeance, perhaps even divine in origin. And I've talked about monsters, things that may be demons or portents of ill omen. But there's one paranormal thing that I have yet to touch upon, because everyone knows there can be ghosts and there can be ghost towns. Now in Connecticut, we have quite a few. And we've talked about one on this, on our series before. But this one we haven't yet. And it is very interesting, and perhaps you know of it. I'm not gonna tell the name until the end, though I do realize it's in the description, but I want you to wonder where this might be. Could it even have been close to your hometown? This town was founded in 1796 by a man named Elijah Andrus. He and a group of very devout people from Hartford had had enough of the Hartford way of life and sought a simpler way of life of worship. And so they settled by the Black Ridge River. Andrus was a very devout person and, from all accounts, a capable leader. But this city, this town, was not without its troubles right away. Within 4 years, Andrus himself, the man who had founded the town, would leave. Now there were rumors as to why he had left. Was it the terrible land that they had chosen? Was it the fact that the soil was harsh, that the river was odd? Or was it infighting? Had others within the community driven Andrus out? There are rumors to both. It's said that he walked off into the wilderness, if it was fighting indeed, and he walked off into the wilderness. Was he perhaps murdered? Was his body taken somewhere else? After all, walking off into the wilderness in the 1700s doesn't seem like a very bright idea. And from all accounts, Elijah Andrus was a very intelligent human being. Speculation. When Andrus left, the community was devoid of a leader, a religious leader to be specific. And what was unique about this particular community, one called Factory Hollow at the time, this community would require every single person, man that is, to attend regular service for worship. The way that they drove these people to the service was they offered rum. They offered a lot of rum. It was rumored that these affairs would get very raucous, and the divine worship would quickly give way to drunken brawls. The men felt emboldened by their drunkenness and would let loose their opinions of the town, usually none of them good. In 1804, there was a turning point for the town. A mill was set up, a woolen mill to be specific. The idea was that if divine worship could not draw those to this town, perhaps jobs and a steady income could do that. And so they, the townsfolk, set up a woolen mill. But troubles again occurred. They had set the mill up upstream from the water, the way that the river ran, and so they needed to build canals and dams, and eventually it said that they got the river to run uphill against itself. It's recorded that many a laborer threw down their equipment when they saw the water running unnaturally, claiming that this was the devil's work. Was it perhaps a curse on the land that had caused these things? The events were not over. The War of 1812 did bring hardships. The woolen mill had brought prosperity to this young town. They had set up a booming economy at first, but the war quickly broke that. It brought hardships, and the woolen mill was sold off by the owners. It did survive under new owners for a bit, but then a terrible fire ripped through it and all but gutted the town. It was 1830. The town would not survive for more than 50 years more. Sometime later, a new mill went up right down the river. This one, a rag paper mill. What rag paper mills were was they would take old rags, pieces of clothing, and the like, and they would process them and turn them into paper. The mill was successful, and it did extend the life of the seemingly dying community for quite some time. Though they were not without their own hardships. And despite the mill's moderate success, something, some force, seemed to be driving the people from the town in droves. It was telling them that it was not safe to settle on this land, that something did not want them there. The Civil War brought death and further hardships to the people of this town, Factory Hollow. Some would leave, never to return, dying on the battlefields. The beginnings of this ghost town were evident everywhere. More homes and businesses stood abandoned than not. Finally, the final fatal blow was struck to the town. A disastrous and terrible fire, reminiscent of the one that had wiped out the old mill, tore through the new rag paper mill. It killed the town. These events occurred just a few years before the town would become a ghost town, and the last remaining residents would find their way out of the community. Were all of these events the cause of this becoming a ghost town, of Factory Hollow losing all of its residents? It would seem like this would be enough. All of these events by themselves enough to propel the spiritual force. My neighbors seem to be having a good time. But there was something else going on in Factory Hollow. Something else that would indeed make this a ghost town. The murders. The first and perhaps most famous murder was one where a traveling peddler went missing. He was a popular fellow in the town, and his disappearance was very noticeable, very easily. The people looked all over for him, but it was thought that perhaps he had just moved away. gone to peddle his wares somewhere else. And then they found the body. It was hidden in a pit of charcoal. Why? Though they suspected perhaps the charcoal peddler himself had killed the traveling merchant, no one was ever arrested, no trial was ever had, and the merchant remained missing. You see, there were other schools of thought. Could this body perhaps be a traveling preacher that had also gone missing? Was this that man? He had been missing as well. And then there was a third, a drover, a person who drives cattle to market to sell. He had gone missing as well. This skeletal body had to have been one of these men, for sure. But who? And which one? Speculation abounded that it was any of them. My theory is far darker. Perhaps the charcoal peddler was a serial killer. If one of those bodies had been found there, why not all? If they had just dug further down, would they have perhaps found the remains? We can never be certain. And why he was never tried and this was never investigated? We will never know. It remains a mystery, a cold case and unsolved to this day. Not that they would ever have any chance of solving it. There is another murder. But first, I will warn you of the paranormal aspects of that skeletal figure, because it does appear over the charcoal pit in this very area. Perhaps it's trying to tell you its story. Perhaps it's trying to tell you how it got there. Or perhaps it's just warning you of maybe your potential fate. Another sinister murder took place in this community as well. One that was sickening. Just before the Civil War, a young assistant to a blacksmith was late for work. He was hurrying there quickly, doing everything he could to make it as close as on time as possible. When he arrived, he began to profusely apologize to the blacksmith himself. What he found was an inhuman anger. The blacksmith drew a butcher's knife, and he came at his assistant, vowing that he would never be late to anything again. What was it that caused this anger? What was it that drove the blacksmith to cut up his assistant? At the very least, he murdered him. There are rumors, however, that he even cut off his assistant's head. That case was also never solved and never closed. The blacksmith himself never tried. Why? No doubt there would be plenty of evidence, and yet it remains unsolved to this day. Rumor has it, though, that if you are in Factory Hollow, you may occasionally look to the forest and see a young man hurrying as if late to an appointment that he will never get to. It's said that he is either covered in thick red gashes, or perhaps he even has his own head in his hands. It's likely that you will see something if you make your way to the area that was once known as Factory Hollow, but is now Gay City State Park. It became Gay City State Park in 1953, named after the Gay family who had lived there during its founding, had come with Elijah Andrus. It's said that in darkness, this ghost town of Gay City comes alive again, and you can see the skeletal remains, or perhaps the ghostly figure of someone vowing never to be late again. It also begs the question, if your town was to up and vanish, if it was to be abandoned right now at this moment, what of you would remain with it? Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of our Seaside Shadows Sunday Spooky Story Time. It's been Andrew, your host. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our potential Mystic Monday Q&A. We'll keep you posted on that. Have a great night, everyone. I look forward to spooking you in the future again.